Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Japan and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a couple of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the last wee while, a few different styles, but if people were to ask me about this brewery, I would say that they're probably best known for their different kinds of IPAs, but mainly the New England Hazies. They're also a very new addition to the Japanese beer scene, but they've built up a very good reputation for themselves in a short period of time, and based on my experiences with them so far, I would say that is quite highly deserved. But the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that I know these guys can do very well. I have been told that this is one of the best beers that these guys apparently do, and it's also supposed to be one of the best beers available from Japan within this particular style category, and we have a nice fresh batch of it as well. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to return to Shizuoka Prefecture, just on the edge of Mount Fuji, a bit to the south of Tokyo here in Japan, and to be specific we are going to go to Mochimune, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful West Coast Brewing. So this particular beer is the double dry hopped version of Super Sunrise. It comes in at 9% ABV, and this one is a hazy New England triple imperial, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So yeah, this beer has been released a few times from what I understand, but this particular batch was only released a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, like I said, this is supposed to be one of the best beers that West Coast Brewing do. They are famed for their IPAs, of course, but I've heard very good things about this one. And yeah, we've got a nice fresh batch of it. So when you have a nice fresh New England IPA with a good reputation, that's always a good position to be in, I have to say. But yeah, been very impressed with West Coast Brewing so far. We've tried a good few IPAs from them now. I think we need to try some other styles going forward though. But I thought this is one that I really want to try when I'm in Japan this time. But this is another beer that I picked up at craft beer based Mother Tree in Umeda here in Osaka. Lovely little beer selection in there. Always some interesting Japanese things and a good few American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand type beers as well. So definitely worth a visit. They brew their own stuff, which is really interesting. So if you find yourself in Japan, I recommend that you go and check these guys out. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what we have. The double dry hopped Super Sunrise from West Coast Brewing in Mochimune, Shizuoka here in Japan. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from West Coast Brewing before, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the very near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So just go into the channel homepage, use the search bar, and type in your hometown, state, county, whatever you like. If I have reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Japanese playlist along with many other things, and you can of course check out the playlist of beer from different countries as well. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you once again a little bit about West Coast Brewing here in Japan. So, West Coast Brewing, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Mochimune City in Shizuoka Prefecture in Japan, a little bit to the south of Tokyo and right next to Mount Fuji, somewhere that I really do want to go. There's quite a few craft beer things popping up there, of course, but the brewery was actually founded back in 2019 by Derek Baston, who's originally from Seattle in Washington in the Pacific Northwest of the US, and he had previously worked as an architect. So Derek originally came to Shizuoka back in 2003, and he would often visit different breweries during his trips home to the US, and he says that he'd always been inspired by the craftsmanship that had gone into the West Coast US beers, and he wanted to bring that to Japan because he felt there weren't really many people doing this at the time. But apparently the idea to found his own brewery can be traced back to 2014 when he designed the Shizuoka distillery for Gaia Flow, and this was his first real look inside the brewing and distilling world, and it inspired him to visit other breweries and distilleries around the country and talk to people inside the industry. And apparently doing this made the whole process of starting his own brewery seem a lot less daunting. But but he founded a bar in Shizuoka called 12 because he wanted to test the water and see if the beers that he wanted to brew would actually be a hit with the locals, and it quickly became apparent that they would be. So they found a premises in an abandoned tuna factory, or tuna processing plant we should say, in the Mochimune marina. They renovated it and converted it into a brewery, and this brewery is equipped with a 10 BBL system, which is around, it's an American barrel, so that's around 1600 litres per brew. They've got 10 fermentation vessels there, as well as 2 bright beer tanks, and they apparently produce between 12 to 20,000 litres of beer per month. And the 3 brewers in the team are Satoshi Niwa, who's from Japan, he's the brewing manager, but then there's Cedric Mail, who's from France, and Grant Scholler, who's from the US. But the brewery's mascot that you'll see on all of the cans is this guy, the Hop Dude, and the artwork is designed by a guy called Simon Henshaw, who I believe is from Manchester in England. I've heard this name before, and I'm pretty sure he designs artwork for other breweries as well. But over the first few years, these guys have leaned mainly towards producing different IPAs, but they're also in the process of establishing a barrel program, from what I understand as well. So hopefully we'll see some nice barley wines and imperial stouts, and maybe some of the kind of old school woody Belgian type sours from these guys going forward. But as of April 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 240 different kinds of beers approximately, according to Untappd, and that number will no doubt continue to increase. But 240 different kinds of beer is pretty impressive, I have to say, when you consider that this brewery's only really been around for about 4 years. So that's, you know, that's more than 1 beer per week actually that they'd be producing. So yeah. That, I think, is everything we can really tell you about West Coast Brewing for the moment. But if you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer and Untappd pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So, yeah, that's that. So, let's go on and actually have a wee look at this beer itself. So, this is one of the numerous breweries now in Japan who are doing 500 milliliter cans. I think West Coast Brewing were the ones who really kind of kicked this off, to be honest with you. But yeah, 500 milliliter can, this one. I believe this beer cost me about 1,400 Japanese yen. So that is going to be somewhere in the region of like, what will that be? That'll be like 11 euros or something like that. So that translates to roughly 110 Swedish kroner, maybe about $12 American, something like that, and maybe somewhere in the region of £10 sterling. But for for a 9% triple IPA, that's probably about what you would pay for something from Overtone, to be honest, but potentially a wee bit more expensive. As I've said to you in all the videos that we've done of the Japanese beers, beer in Japan does tend to be a little bit more expensive. The main reason for that is that they don't really produce their own barley here in Japan, so that also has to be imported from Germany or from the US quite often. But yeah, the hops are all imported from the US, Australia, New Zealand, and a little bit from Europe as well. So all countries that until recently don't really have trade agreements with the US, from what I understand, so you've still got a lot of tariffs and stuff, and that's one of the other things that drives up beer prices here in Japan. I think the tax system doesn't really favour beer brewing either. I think it's malt that's actually taxed quite heavily in comparison to rice-based alcohol such as Nihonshu and things. But anyway, that's a different story. But like we said earlier, this beer is the double dry hop version of Super Sunrise, supposedly one of their best IPAs, comes in at 9% ABV, New England Triple IPA. The hops in this one are Citra, Amarillo, Denali and Enigma, all hops that we've come across before. Denali is probably the one that I am least familiar with, but all of these guys except Enigma are American. Citra is about 14% alpha acid, gives you a lovely juicy kind of mango character, but also with a good little bit of a lemon limey note. Amarillo is about 12% alpha acid, it gives you a big kind of oily citrusy orange sort of thing. And then Enigma, as we say, that's the Australian one. That's usually about 14 or 15% alpha acid in my experience. It gives you a kind of, it gives you a sort of white, green, grapey, gooseberry kind of note, but you do get a little bit of this kind of red curranty character out of it. It's really interesting. But Denali, I put my notes in on Denali because, like I say, I'm not madly familiar with this hop. It gives you around 14% alpha acid. We said earlier that it's American. It's brewed originally from Nugget, Zeus, and another American variety, and it gives you sort of pineapple-y, kiwi, and piney notes. Now, I have to say, my experiences of Denali so far have not been, you know, overly positive. It's not a hop that I like all that much, and I think it was mainly the one that I had Denali in before was like a West Coast IPA, and it had this really kind of, I remember, kind of dry, herbally sort of notes. So yeah, that was one of the main reasons why I didn't like it. I don't think I've had it in New England IPAs all that often, so it should be quite interesting actually. But yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. Quite an interesting hop profile in the beer. So I'll just like have a wee quick look at the artwork once again. There you can see the hop dude is just sitting on the beach there enjoying the sunrise. You can see the campfire and stuff there. He's chilling with his friends. But yeah, there you can see on the side, West Coast Brewing, and you've also got the little QR code and things on the can there. Let me just see. So, oh, nearly dropping the can. So yeah, you can see there's the QR code, and then yeah, West Coast Brewing, Shizuoka, Japan, Super Sunrise. So yeah, 9% triple New England hazy IPA, this one. Let's get it out into the glass and see what it's all about. So, let's do this. This does look very nice actually. Like I said, this is a very fresh batch from what I understand. It also says Rise and Shine on the side, I forgot to point that out. But yeah, very fresh batch of this beer from what I understand. But yeah, it looks very, very nice and pretty much as you would expect from a New England IPA. So yeah, before the head disappears on this one, you can see that it's poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of cream coloured head on this one. Kind of medium sized bubbles. It's not too foamy. I'll just let you guys have a little look at that. But yeah, not a too foamy a head on this one. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But yeah, not too much in the way of visible carbonation. Colour wise, I would say that this one is quite akin to a sort of bright mango juice. I always like comparing New England IPAs to different fruit juices because that's just what the appearance reminds me of. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of your beer too. But when it comes to IPAs, you don't often have to care about these about those two particular variables. The level of haze in this one is kind of what you would expect. The haze, of course, depends on the oak content, wheat content, and to a degree what yeast you're using. But yeah, this one looks pretty appropriate for a New England triple IPA, I have to say. Nice looking beer, this one. You can see the level of haze on this when I put my fingers behind the glass. But yeah, I don't think we need to say anything else about the appearance of this one. Let's have a wee look at the aroma and just see what we get. So, straight away, I'm going to say this beer does smell pretty damn nice, and it smells pretty balanced actually. Now, as I've said to you in many reviews before, when it comes to New England IPAs, there are 6 different elements of flavour to think about. So I would say that the things to think about would be the kind of farmhousey, yeasty type character and the rye-lean and grainy side of things. Those are a bit more prominent in American brewed New England IPAs, the original ones such as Alchemist and Lawson's Finest Liquids and stuff like that. But then you've also got the wheaty, bitey character, the oaty creaminess, the barley malt bread, and the sweeter side of things. And for me, the aroma of this one shows you a little bit. For me, I think this is going to be a slightly more wheaty leaning New England IPA, but there's a lot of oat in there, and of course you are getting the big bready notes from the barley malt. But it's got a lovely bright green component to it, this one, and I have to say quite a citrusy leaning, quite a citrusy, zesty leaning, fruity side of things. I definitely get the kiwi from the Denali coming out of this one, but the reason that maybe stands out to me is because, like I say, I'm not overly familiar with this hop. So yeah, you've definitely got a mix of stuff going on in this one. But let's break the aroma down and just describe it for you a wee bit more in depth, as we always like to do. So yeah, for me, the backbone of this beer, you absolutely get a little bit of that typical fresh, white bready bread crust. That's the backbone of the beer. There's a little bit of a there's a very slight woodiness to this one. There is a little bit of pardon me, Jacob's cream cracker type quality to it, but then above that you start to get a little touch of a kind of wholemeal brown bready character. Quite a dense but still fresh white bready note in there as well, and you can absolutely smell some of the kind of wheaty character coming out of this one. In the back of the nose you definitely get a little bit of that wheaty bitey sort of thing, and you can also smell the wheat kind of densifying out the beer. But for me, the wheaty character in this one is kind of a little bit zippy and a little bit more kind of bitey, to be honest with you, compared to other ones. So the more that I smell of this beer, the more I think it's going to be a kind of wheaty leaning New England IPA. It was always Trillium in the US that was a little bit wheaty leaning, I thought. But yeah, this beer does smell quite nice in that sense. On the oaty side of things, you can smell a lovely little bit of creaminess coming out of it. So yeah, lovely little bit of creaminess in the beer. A good little bit of kind of oaty dryness as well. So this beer is quite fresh. As I've always said with New England IPAs, the oats are usually a good indicator of how fresh your beer is going to be. So the creamier the oats are, the fresher the beer is, the drier they are, the older it is. But this one is just a couple of weeks old, something like that. So it's in pretty damn good condition. But the thing with New England IPAs I've always found is you've got to find that sweet spot when they've mellowed out a wee bit. If you drink these too fresh, all you're going to get is green. And of course you don't have, compared to the West Coast IPAs, you don't have the sweeter malt quite often to balance it out. But yeah, with this one you do get a good little bit of oaty creaminess in there, and there's a wee bit of that Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing coming out of this beer too. So yeah, it gets a big thumbs up from me on the malty side of the aroma. This is quite an interesting beer. Let's look at the green side of things first off, and the rest of the hoppy character. So for me, the hoppy side of this beer is kind of what you'd expect. You've got a little touch of earthiness in this one, but not too much. But then there's a wee touch of herbal character in there as well, but quite a bright and big green component to this one. And the floral side of this beer is quite distinctive, and I do suspect that it's the Denali, because the other hops I am quite familiar with, but Denali, I remember, had this really kind of unusual floral character to it. So the floral character for me, it almost smells a little bit more like weedy or tobacco-y or something like that. It's just got a wee bit of a herbally kind of character to it. So yeah, a wee bit of that going on in this one, but then you've also got a kind of oily, zesty, grassy character to the beer. So yeah, the way this beer goes, I think, is really quite nice. Yeah, also interesting stuff. So on the fruity side of things, this beer is also pretty interesting. So I'm definitely getting a little bit of the kind of more pungent passion fruit and grapefruity side of the I'm definitely getting a little bit more on that side of things from the Citra, but big juicy mango notes as well. Absolutely getting some of the pineapple from the Denali, but then beyond that there's absolutely some nice big zesty orangey character from the Amarillo. Absolutely. Yeah, the orange for me is actually quite apparent, but I do get quite a bit of kiwi, and kiwi is a fruit I don't really have it that often. So to me, the kiwi notes in this one stand out, but you can definitely smell, the more that your nose gets used to this beer, you can smell the juicier, kind of softer mango notes in there, and you've also got just that little bit of kind of gooseberry, white green grape from the Enigma as well. So yeah, lovely big kind of white green grapey characters from the Enigma. You have that. You definitely have that little bit of red curranty nature from it as well. But yeah, quite a lot. The kiwi is quite pungent in this one for me, and that's maybe just because I'm not quite used to it. But yeah, for me, yeah, quite a lot of orangey character, good little bit of juicy mango, a little bit of oily pineapple. Yeah, the way that this goes together, I think, is really quite nice. So it gets a big thumbs up from me in that regard. A really nice smelling, just soft, juicy, fruity New England IPA actually. And the green component actually gets a little bit smoother the more that you smell of this beer too. So remember, there are 3 kinds of hoppings you can use in IPAs. Assuming you have a 90-minute wort boil, of course, early addition hopping will take place within the first hour of the wort boil. That gives you mainly bitterness. But then you get late addition hopping within the last half hour of the wort boil. A little bit of bitterness, but also a little bit of, it'll give you a little bit of flavour and aroma. And then, mainly flavour and aroma, but a little bit of bitterness. I should have said it like that. But then dry hopping after the wort boil takes place is all about flavour and aroma. So West Coast IPAs tend to use all 3. New England IPAs tend to rely on the latter 2. What that translates to in flavour and aroma, early addition hopping is going to give you a more deep and kind of dank pine resiny type note, whereas late addition and dry hopping is going to give you more of a kind of bright green component with a kind of zestier character. So yeah, that's worth bearing in mind with these kinds of beer. But yeah, in terms of the green component in this one, it is quite bright, so a lot of late addition and dry hopping with this one, as you can tell when it's double dry hopped. But now you know the technicalities of it. We've gone through the aroma quite well with this beer. I think it's about time that we taste this one actually. So yeah, this is the double dry hopped Super Sunrise New England Hazy Imperial Triple, whatever you want to call it, IPA at 9% ABV from West Coast Brewing in Mochimune in Shizuoka Prefecture here in Japan. Slanja, skål, cheers, kampai. Oh yeah. Now I have to say, that is pretty damn good. I can see why a lot of people were raving about this beer. Yeah, I think this is very, very nice actually. Big thumbs up from me. Now, all the beers I've had from this brewery have been good. I think, you know, the West Coast double IPA that I had, which was the very first one I tried from them, I felt that was quite fitting because the brewery is called West Coast Brewing, but funnily enough they do East Coast IPAs quite often, and they're on the east coast of Japan. But yeah, this one's just really nice. Very soft, very juicy New England IPA. Gives you a little bit more bitterness the further into the aftertaste you go, right enough. But yeah, it's it's actually a lot more softer and juicy than I thought it was going to be from the aroma. I thought this one was going to have a little bit of a kind of punch to it and stuff, but it's just really, really nicely done. So yeah, lovely stuff. Once again, very solid beer from these guys. But yeah, let's try and break this beer down a little bit more and just describe the flavour more in depth for you, but it's really good stuff. So, middle third of your palate then, you can feel the backbone of this beer is absolutely that kind of soft, fresh, white bready bread crust there. You do have that little bit of graininess to the backbone. Further forward on that, on that middle third of your palate, you do get a little touch of woodiness out of the beer, and then you can feel there's a little bit of a kind of Jacob's cream cracker type quality to it as well. So yeah, bread crust, Jacob's cream cracker, little touch of woodiness, all things that you quite commonly find in the backbones of these New England IPAs. Above that, I do actually get a little bit of a layer of there's a little layer of wholemeal, brown bready character. It actually gives you a wee bit of sweetness when I think about it. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is really nice. Above the brown bready layer, you start to get that fluffier white bready kind of layer coming out of the beer, and yeah, I do think that goes together very, very nicely. The breadiness in this beer just gives you a wee bit of sweetness. I think this beer, I'm finding that the malty character in this beer gets a bit sweeter the further into the aftertaste that you go. But I would say that this one, for a 9%er, it's remarkably easy to drink. It's a bit dangerous in that sense, actually. And it's one, I have to say, it's one of the lighter 9% triple IPAs I've come across in terms of mouthfeel too, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. But like I say, you've got that fluffy white bready layer in there that gives you a wee bit of sweetness, and above that you have a more you have a slightly more dense wheaty character out of this one. And I would say the wheaty side of this beer, in the middle third of your palate at least, is actually quite smooth. It doesn't have the zippiness to it that I thought it was going to have from... it doesn't have the zippiness that I thought it was going to have from the aroma, actually. So, yeah. Yeah. That really is nice. But yeah, lovely kind of smooth wheaty character to this one as well. Then above that you start to get the oatiness out of the beer. So kind of down the middle line of your palate, down the middle line of your palate you can feel the more dense oaty character coming out of the beer. And it's got a lovely little bit of smoothness to it there, but as I said earlier, as you move out toward the edges of your palate, you get a little bit of the kind of dryness from the from the oats, sorry, but you still get that little bit of sweetness. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of Golden Promise malt in this one. There's just something quite familiar about the oaty character and the sweetness that this beer has. So above the oats, you do get a little bit of sweetness. In the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there's just a little touch of like a Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing. And again, I really like how that goes together, but as you move out toward the edges of your palate in that particular layer, you start to get a wee bit more McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of character. So yeah, middle third of the palate is really nice with this one. Let's go on to the back third of your palate then. The border region between middle and back third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of that fresh kind of white bready build-up in there. And the base of it, you do have, on the base of that back third of your palate, there's a little bit of the kind of grainy backbone from the barley malt bread, from the bread crust, as I said. So yeah, that goes together really nicely. It's a little bit drier though, as I've always said. Drier and more bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, the sweeter flavours come out further forward. You've got the cracker in there again on top, which is a little bit drier, and then yeah, above that you've got a little bit of a more kind of wholemeal brown bready character. So you can feel that that wholemeal brown bready layer is a little bit more, kind of taller and more airy. Than the white bready layer above that is even more tall and more airy, and then you can feel a little bit of the wheaty character just sits on top of that. So you've got that wee bit of wheaty bitiness in there. But yeah, you've got a little bit of that wheaty bitiness in there for sure, and that kind of lingers into the aftertaste. And above everything else, you've got a wee bit of yeasty character coming out of this one as well. So yeah, the yeasty notes sitting above everything else. There's a little bit of a more kind of farmhousey yeasty bread in there, which I do like. Like I say, farmhousey yeasty bread in there. It's got a little touch of honeycomb to it as well, just a little bit of woody character. So yeah, the yeasty notes come out of this beer the further into the aftertaste that you go to, but definitely back third of your palate you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just condenses down and squashes together. So yeah, let's go on to the green component then of the beer. Back corners of your palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, the beer gives you just a little touch of that herbal character, and as you push toward the kind of front corners of your palate, you get a little bit of a kind of it's got this quite distinct floral note, and I do think a lot of that comes from the Denali. I remember Denali having this quite distinctive floral side to it, and it's almost like a more herbally floral character actually, but you do get a wee bit of the typical floral spice on the front corners of your palate. But round the front tip of your tongue, you've got a wee bit of a lighter, more grassy side of thing to the beer, and it has a wee bit of an oiliness to it and a little bit of zestiness. So yeah, the way everything goes together in this beer is really, really nice. Overall, I'd say the green component is quite oily and quite smooth actually. So yeah, I like that about this one, definitely. On the front third of your palate then, the fruity side of things, the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a little bit of that kind of nice white bready build up in there, the base of the front third of your palate, a little bit of bread crust again, the smooth brown bread and a wee bit of white bread, then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's identify the fruits. Definitely at the back of that front third of your palate, there's a bit of that stronger grapefruity note from the Citra. There's also a wee bit of the passion fruit, but then you'll feel as you come further forward, it's interesting because the base of that, the back half of that front third of your palate, you definitely get this kind of stronger kiwi note, which is from the Denali, but above that, you get the big juicy mangoes from the Citra. And as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, it's for me, it's mainly pineapple-y. But when you go into the front half of the front third of your palate, that's when it changes a little bit. So yeah, the fruity side of the beer on the front half is interesting because the base of the front half of that front third of your palate, you get more of a kind of oily gooseberry type note, which is going to be the Enigma in this case, but then above that you get the big zesty. You get the big zesty kind of oily orange from the Amarillo. So yeah, the back half of that front third of your palate is the Citra and the Denali, but then the front half is about the Enigma and the Amarillo for sure. The thing that's quite interesting for me is that with the Enigma usually gives you this little bit of red curranty character, and you know there's tiny little hints of it, but for me Enigma's actually, in this case it feels a little bit more like Nelson Sauvin or you know Mandarina Bavaria, something like that. That's the kind of vibe that I'm really getting out of this beer from Enigma. But you know, hops can behave in different ways depending on what hops they're paired with, or even what kind of malt base they're in. You see this all the time. But yeah, as I say, Enigma for me is giving you more of its gooseberry, white green grapey type note. So yeah, quite interesting actually to observe that in this beer. But like I say, the fruity side of this one's quite well balanced. You've got a good mix of the kind of more tropical fruits and the more kind of citrusy, zesty ones, and a wee bit of more oily gooseberry type stuff in there as well. So yeah, really interesting combination of flavours in this one. And this beer, I have to say, is quite different in its flavour compared to what you would expect from the aroma. But that's everything we need to say about the flavour. Let's round off with the mouthfeel. So, as I said earlier, this beer is like a remarkably easy drinking New England triple. It's ridiculous actually, it covers its alcohol very, very well. Yeah, so on the mouthfeel, I would say this one is kind of, I'd actually go as far as saying that it's kind of mid-bodied, top end of mid-bodied. It's really not a very thick New England IPA, this one. It is a little bit lighter. Carbonation is very, very smooth. It feels quite clean and has a little bit of an oily slickness to it, in fairness, and this is kind of suiting the Japanese palate. To the Japanese, they want their beers to be light and drinkable, so this kind of makes sense from that perspective. In terms of the IBUs with this beer, I get the feeling this one is maybe about 40 or 50-ish IBUs at most. It doesn't feel madly bitter, but remember, IBU count is one of my weakest points of beer reviewing, so always take them with a pinch of salt. I'll say this and it will be like 60 or 70 or something, but for me, this beer feels a little bit more than the standard 30 for New England's, and quite often when you have a double, you'll put it up to 40, and for a triple, you put it up to 50, just to balance it a wee bit more. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one is 40 or 50 IBUs because of that, and it does build in bitterness, like I said, but in the middle of your palate, with this one, you get a lovely little bit of smoothness. With the malt base, you get a little bit of dryness, a little bit of smoothness, and a degree of sweetness as well. And like I said earlier, the fruits are quite soft and juicy, and you've got a mix of tropical fruit in there, a little bit more of an oily berry type note, and then you've got the big zesty oily orange as well. So this beer has a wee bit of everything to it, and I can certainly see why people speak so highly of this one. This is a very, very good New England double IPA, and it's certainly, or triple IPA I should say, sorry. And it's certainly up there with the best New Englands that I've had from Europe or from the US as well. Actually, we've had some very good ones like Trillium and Treehouse and you know, Toppling Goliath and all these kind of guys. Like, this is a very, very solid New England triple IPA, and I think probably one of the best ones I've had in this style category from Japan actually. So yeah, definitely see why this beer has a bit of hype about it. It is very solid actually. So I think we can leave it at that for this review. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from West Coast Brewing as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But yeah, this is the double dry hop version of Super Sunrise, a 9% New England triple IPA with Citra, Amarillo, Denali and Enigma hops in it from West Coast Brewing in Shizuoka Prefecture, Mochimune to be precise, here in Japan. So once again, thank you for watching. Check out my social media, check out their social media, and I'll see you guys in another review very, very soon. Slàinte, Scott, cheers, and Kampai.